Hello, everyone. We're starting a series of lessons dedicated to authorization, which means user registration, login, and identifying the user as authorized. We will do this piece by piece. Let's start by creating our user model in the database. So let it be as follows. We write model user with fields ID, string ID, default UUID, which is a string type. This will be the ID of our record. And the default value is some UUID. Yes, it's a set of letters, numbers, and hyphens. And then it'll have a username for the user, and it will be unique to the system. It will also have a password, and it will have the creation date. Actually, I recommend always creating this create a TED, even if you don't yet know how you'll use it, because, well, it might be useful in the future. And if you don't create it in advance, your create a TED won't be tracked, and you'll simply miss these data in your system later. Done, and created a TED. All right, we created the user model. Now let's create the corresponding migration. For this, run pnpm prisma migrate dev. Run it. Call it add user model. All right, so the model has been created. Moving on. Next, I suggest creating an endpoint for user registration, for now only on the backend. The registration endpoint will work as follows. It accepts the username and password desired by the user and saves them in the database. So, here's the task. Let's get started. For this, in the backend, we'll create a folder for this endpoint in the router. We'll call the registration signup. Okay? Let's first define the input. Input.ts input. Next, we'll just name it as per our agreement. The signup.charpc.input. The username is as follows. It should be at least one character and match this regular expression. Nothing new here. In principle, we had the same regular expression here before. Later, of course, we'll move this into a separate variable, but for now, it's not that important. All right, and it should have a password string with a minimum of one character. That's all. We've sorted out the input. Now let's create the endpoint itself, index.ts. The endpoint is somewhat like the process of creating an idea. That is, we need to check if a user with this nickname exists. And if it does exist, we need to throw an error. But if it doesn't exist, create it. ktx.prisma.user, just like we did for ideas. Here in create.idea, if you look, prisma.idea.create, there's just a user, and we pass the nickname from the input here. But here, attention, we will not store the password as the user set it. It's unsafe. This is usually done by hashing the password. This is crypto. It's a default thing available in Node.js, and we ask to hash our password. So in the end, our password is some arbitrary string. Suppose the user set the password 1234. They set the password 1234, and in this construct, it gets converted to some hash. A hash is just some relatively insane set of letters and numbers. But the point is that if you pass the same password to this function twice, it will always return the same combination of these letters and numbers. And in the future, when our user tries to log in, they will also enter their username and password. We will convert the password into this same hash, look up a user in the database with this username, and hash. That way, our system doesn't actually know their password, but at the same time, we can check if the user has entered the correct password. This is all to ensure that, imagine if this person has the same password on our service as on another service, or if some malicious individuals gain access to our database and see the original password. And that's not good. But in the future, we will improve, make our security system even better. But for now, this is enough. And we can move on. We've created this endpoint. but we don't have a front end to call this endpoint yet. This situation happens. In the future, I will teach you how to write tests. We will check endpoints without a front end using tests. For now, let's move to the next lesson. In the next lesson, we'll enable calling our TRPC endpoints and test their functionality through a special interface. So, let's check the types to ensure nothing is broken, and we've added everything correctly. So types are fine, but we forgot to add our endpoint to the index file. Call generate index, and sign up input is added. Run the types again, and we see that everything works. We've added the user model. We've added the registration endpoint, and we move on. Thank you.